The chief executive defends his decision not to give a timeline for the scrapping of antivirus restrictions for incoming travelers. Live performances and dancing allowed in bars and restaurants starting today. And in the UK, Home Secretary Suella Braverman resigns. Hello and welcome to TVB News. Chief Executive John Lee proposed a slew of measures to attract global talents to Hong Kong in his policy address yesterday. But there was no word on scrapping quarantine for incoming travelers, prompting questions today from some members of the public and lawmakers. Sharon Tang reports.
The chief executive took questions from members of the public during a joint radio phone-in program this morning. Some doubted how the government can meet its target of attracting 35,000 global talents annually to Hong Kong when the city's quarantine restrictions haven't been entirely lifted. The CE defended his decision, adding that the city must be cautious with travel restrictions, especially after the healthcare system collapsed in March. The same topic was brought up in the Legislative Council during today's Q&A session. A lawmaker slammed the authorities for not having a timeline for the further easing of antivirus restrictions.
For
visitors to come here and subject to restrictions of 3 days, imagine you are that visitor. Would you choose this city? What I consider is that whether the healthcare system will not be subject to any challenges if we go down this path. The direction will not change. So it's incorrect to say that I don't have a roadmap.
Then there was this question that drew a strong reaction from the CE.
I thank you for your policy address. You are not scared of smearing and allegations of collusion. You talk about collusion. That is the word used by external forces trying to stir up trouble. We have to fight against these allegations. I bring the whole society together. We work together, regardless of your affiliation and your views. As long as you advocate one country, two systems, and you uphold the basic law, then you can make your contribution to our development.
Others raised concerns over whether John Lee can further cut down the waiting time for public housing. Lee said his administration will not give up its efforts to better develop Hong Kong and serve the people. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
Some lawmakers questioned John Lee on the absence of a time frame for the enactment of Article 23 of the Basic Law in his policy address. Lee said preparations are needed to cope with some extreme circumstances. Christy Khan reports.
The chief executive's maiden policy address yesterday didn't outline a clear time frame for national security legislation under Article 23 of the Basic Law. In today's question and answer section at the Legislative Council, some lawmakers voiced their concerns.
In paragraph 13, you only gloss over Article 23. And in the 110 KPI, there is no timetable for Article 23, which is an important task. Why don't you give a timeline and a KPI for Article 23?
In response, John Lee explained why the precise timeline cannot be given for the time being.
The
reason why I say in the policy address that we are doing the preparation work, because I don't want to backtrack. I don't want to remedy. A piece of legislation must be useful and appropriate. We must ensure the legislation can deal with extreme circumstances.
Regarding the construction of 30,000 light public housing units in the next 5 years, authorities reiterated that the units will be of high quality, adding that they will not be in the form of cargo containers. Authorities reiterated that light public housing is one of the solutions to the current housing problem in Hong Kong, saying that this approach only requires a short construction period, and this will help reduce the waiting time for public housing units in future.
If we continue to make use of conventional public housing as the only solution, then actually we would not be able to increase the supply for the coming 5 years. That's objective reality.
The government plans to build most of the light public housing flats in the new territories, emphasizing that they have no intention to convert the current community treatment facilities and quarantine centers into housing units. Christy Khan, TVB News.
Authorities said the 2-year Top Talent Pass scheme introduced in the policy address yesterday will not require the talents to secure a job in Hong Kong before the application.
If you need a job to come to Hong Kong, it would be easier for big corporations, but we do have a lot of startups and SMEs that may experience difficulties. Since talents are so important to Hong Kong, I think we have to think out of the box and allow the top talents to come to Hong Kong first, so that the startups and the SMEs would have that much more choices.
The city reported 5,433 coronavirus cases today, with 335 of them imported. Starting today, live performances and dancing will be allowed once again in bars, restaurants, and other catering venues. Sharon Tang again.
The show can finally go on. In this bar in Central, live bands and guitar performances are making a comeback tonight. Still, performers must do an RAT before entering the premises on the day of their show and take 2 PCR tests every 7 days. They must also try their best to wear a mask at all times during the performance and keep a 1.5 meter distance away from the audience. This performer said, "I think it's a bit of a hassle. Not everyone has time to do 2 PCR tests, and more so, staff members at bars don't need to do that."
Welcome.
This bar operator says live bands help accentuate the atmosphere, making customers more willing to stay longer and thus spend more. He says some musicians have their own dedicated fan bases and expects business to improve by 50%. Still, some businesses say many performers have changed the course of their career path. But the relaxation has caused huge competition in the field to hire talent such as disc jockeys and musicians. This operator says the situation for musicians is even worse than disc jockeys, since several people are required to form a band. Customers who'd like to dance and drive must wear a mask. The gathering limit has also been raised from 4 to 12. This comes as Hong Kong reported another 5,098 locally acquired coronavirus cases. No new mutant strains were found. 10 infections have been reported across 4 elderly care homes, involving 9 residents and 1 carer. 30 care home residents have been classified as close contacts. 665 positive cases were reported across nearly 500 schools and kindergartens. Among them, 6 classes and 3 extracurricular activity groups will now suspend face-to-face classes for a week. 9 more patients died, bringing the death toll in this wave of the pandemic to 10,093. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
In other news, according to Japan's Nikkei newspaper, the U.S. government is considering a plan to jointly produce weapons with Taiwan. Citing a person with direct knowledge of the U.S. government's deliberations, the report says discussions about the plan have begun. Washington is reportedly considering providing technology to produce weapons in Taiwan or producing weapons in the United States using Taiwanese parts. A U.S. State Department spokesperson said any such moves would seek to ensure the rapid transfer of defensive capabilities to Taiwan. The report comes after U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Monday that Beijing is determined to pursue reunification with Taiwan on a much faster timeline. On Sunday, President Xi Jinping said during the 20th Party Congress that China would never renounce the right to use force over Taiwan, but that it would strive for a peaceful resolution. In Britain, Prime Minister Liz Truss is hanging on to power by a thread after a chaotic day in Parliament, followed by one of her senior ministers resigning. This underscoring further the erosion of Truss's authority to lead the Conservative government. Tracy Furness has more.
A chaotic day in Parliament was followed by the resignation of Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who said she had made a mistake and accepted responsibility. Braverman said in her resignation letter that she had sent an official document from her personal email to a parliamentary colleague, adding that this was a technical infringement of the rules. She also said she was concerned over the direction of Prime Minister Liz Truss's government. Truss was quick to appoint former Cabinet Minister and Transport Secretary Grant Shapps to the post of Home Secretary Wednesday.
Obviously, it's been a turbulent time for the government, but I think the most important thing is to make sure that people in this country know that they've got security. And that's why it's a great honour to be appointed as Home Secretary today.
Speaking earlier in the day to lawmakers in Parliament for the first time since her U-turn on the budget Wednesday, Truss apologised and admitted she had made mistakes during her 6 weeks in office. Many Conservatives say Truss must resign, but she has remained defiant, saying she is a fighter and not a quitter. Political analyst Tony Travers from the London School of Economics said the grim faces of her Conservative lawmakers in the House of Commons suggest that Truss faces an uphill struggle to save her job.
I think she performed reasonably well, especially against the horrible backdrop of the last couple of weeks for her. And she tried to be combative, but also apologise. But in the end, those behind her, her MPs, didn't look that happy. I mean, they were just sitting there rather quiet mostly. So she got through the day, and given what's happened recently, that's not bad, but I don't think it radically alters her position. It just keeps her there for another day at least.
With opinion polls giving the opposition Labour Party a large and growing lead, many Conservatives believe that their only hope of avoiding electoral oblivion is to replace Truss. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
In other news, Malaysian voters will head to the polls on November 19th. About 21 million Malaysians are eligible to vote in the general election, a contest that the graft-tainted ruling party hopes will strengthen its hold on power. Campaigning will go on for 2 weeks, and candidates will have to file their nominations on November 5th. Last Monday, Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob dissolved Parliament and called for snap polls. He has been nominated as the Prime Minister candidate of the United Malays National Organization, or UMNO, again. UMNO may have the edge in next month's election as the opposition is in disarray. But analysts said turnout is expected to be lower than in the past due to voter apathy and the monsoon season that has already triggered floods across the country. In Indonesia, close to 100 children have died from acute kidney injuries so far this year, said to be caused by medicinal syrups. Some medicinal syrups available in Indonesia contain ingredients linked to fatal acute kidney injury. That's according to the country's health minister today. Indonesia has temporarily banned all sales of all syrup-based medications. The government of the Gambia in West Africa is also probing similar deaths linked to paracetamol syrups after 70 fatalities were reported. The syrups there were made by a New Delhi-based company, which India says they are investigating. Farmers gathered in cities and towns across New Zealand today in protest against the government's plan to tax agriculture emissions. Farmers drove tractors and pickup trucks and carried signs to more than 50 protest sites across the country. In order to tackle climate change, the confirmed plans last week price long-lived agricultural gases and biogenic methane, which mainly comes from cow and sheep burps. The plan has been criticized by farming groups concerned about how emissions will be priced and how the program will be governed. There are 10 million beef and dairy cattle and 26 million sheep in New Zealand. About half of all greenhouse gas emissions come from farms. Still ahead, Putin declares martial law in 4 occupied regions of Ukraine. A survey suggests an average 3.6% pay hike for Hong Kong employees next year. And Anna May Wong set to become the first Asian American to be featured on U.S. currency. Welcome back to TVB News. The Russian-appointed administration of Kherson has begun an evacuation of the city amid reports of Ukrainian advances in the area. Kherson is the only regional capital Russian forces have captured since launching their invasion of Ukraine in February. This comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin called for an even greater war effort and declared martial law in the 4 Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. Daniel Rowell tells us more.
About 50,000 to 60,000 people are expected to be evacuated from the city of Kherson over 6 days. Vladimir Saldo, the head of the Russian-installed administration of Kherson, said his staff are also being relocated. Still, he added that Russia has the resources to hold the city and even launch a counterattack should it be required. This comes as Ukrainian forces step up their counteroffensive at Kherson. The latest update from Kyiv said Ukraine's military had killed 43 Russian servicemen and destroyed 6 tanks there. Kherson is arguably the most strategically important of the 4 Ukrainian regions Russia said it had annexed in recent weeks. It controls the only land route to the Crimean Peninsula, which was annexed by Russia in 2014, and the mouth of the 2,200-kilometer-long Dnipro River that bisects Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin demanded an all-Russia war effort and declared martial law in the 4 regions of Ukraine occupied by his forces: Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk and Luhansk. The declaration authorized the creation of civil defense forces, the potential imposition of curfews, as well as travel and public gathering restrictions. That's in addition to tighter censorship and broader law enforcement powers for the Russian-installed authorities. During his nightly address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky ridiculed Putin's decision. He said Russia avoided even the word war for 6 months, punished its own people with criminal cases for it, and now it itself declares martial law in the occupied territory. Zelensky added the occupiers themselves brought the war to our land under their constant false pretense of alleged negotiations, and now they're signing some decrees cementing the war. He urged Ukrainian citizens in occupied territories to avoid being drafted into the Russian army. He also claimed that 233 Iranian-made Shahed drones and dozens of missiles have been shot down by Ukrainian forces over the past month. Daniel Rowell, TVB News.
A survey has found that local employees received an average pay increase of 3.5% in the current year. And some 70% of the companies surveyed indicated there will still be an average pay hike of 3.6% next year. The Hong Kong Institute of Human Resource Management surveyed nearly 170 enterprises involving 120,000 employees in the first 9 months of the year. The multimedia and IT sector saw the highest increase in pay. Anna May Wong, the first Chinese-American film star in Hollywood, is set to become the first Asian American to be featured on U.S. currency. That's according to the U.S. Mint, which is responsible for producing coinage for the country. This report from NBC News.
One of the first Asian Americans to dazzle Hollywood's silver screen is now the first to grace U.S. currency. An estimated $500 million quarters will soon pay tribute to Anna May Wong, who landed her first acting role at just 14 years old in 1919 and went on to star in TV, radio, theater, and movies. But the new coin pays tribute to more than her decades of success. It also honors her struggle in an era when yellowface and laws criminalizing interracial relationships ran rampant.
The way she fought back was through her talent as an actor. She really transcended those stereotype roles because she was such a talented actress.
The third-generation American paved the way for other Asian American actors like Lucy Liu, who received a star on the Walk of Fame next to Wong's.
So 100 years ago, she was a pioneer while enduring racism, marginalization, and exclusion.
Wong's elegance on screen, now etched into the corridor, with a close-up of her unmistakable face resting on her manicured hand. And on the flip side will be George Washington. But this version of the founding father is designed by a woman for the first time in history.
The power of U.S. currency is that it really exemplifies and shows to everyday citizens what we value as a nation.
The U.S. Mint will begin rolling out Wong's quarter starting Monday, all part of a 4-year effort to honor female trailblazers on coins, including poet Maya Angelou and astronaut Dr. Sally Ride, as their legacies continue to inspire change. Emily Ikeda, NBC News.
That's the news. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.